Hello, my friends. If you're not new here, I'm so excited to be back with you. If you're new here, hi, my name's Liz, aka Kingdom of Sass, and on this channel we chat through book reviews, book recaps, and just anything bookish that comes to mind. For today's video, we're going to be chatting through a recap of Quicksilver by Callie Hart. This recap is perfect for you if you don't feel like rereading the book, or if you just don't own Quicksilver and you need a quick refresher. This is going to be a pretty in-depth walkthrough, so grab a seat, grab yourself a drink, and let's hop into it. So when our story first opens, we meet Saris Fane. She's an orphan, she's a thief, and she's really just trying to do her best to make enough money so that her and her brother Hayden can survive. The place that they live is called Zilvaren, but more specifically, Saris and Hayden live in the 3rd Ward. Zilvaren as a whole is just pretty much this desert wasteland. Water is scarce, resources are scarce, and a lot of people are just trying to fight for resources and really fight to survive. The 3rd Ward specifically is one of the poorest wards in Zilvaren, and it's known for being disease-ridden. Whether or not it's an actual disease has yet to be proven. So when we first see Saris, she's actually been captured by one of the Queen's men. As a resident of the 3rd Ward, she's supposed to stay there pretty much because they're all quarantined. The guard sees her, questions her, and whenever he hears that she's from the 3rd Ward, he freaks out, removes one of his gold gauntlets, and drops it on the ground because he's so disgusted he doesn't want to get infected. Saris, being the thief that she is, sees this as her opportunity. That gold gauntlet could change her and Hayden's lives. They could maybe afford a home, they could eat, they wouldn't have to worry about water rations, they'd be comfortable. So she shoots her shot. She grabs the gauntlet and runs. Of course, the guard chases after her, but she scales the wall back to the 3rd Ward and ends up making it over. Of course, the guard tells her, "You're going to regret this, you've just made an enemy, give me the gauntlet back and nothing will happen to you." Of course, Saris being Saris, she decides that she's gonna take the gauntlet anyway, and whenever she hops over the wall into the 3rd Ward, something strange seems to happen with the metal. It almost seems to speak to her, it kind of vibrates a little bit. It's not doing what it should do. She doesn't pause too long to think about it and books it over to Elroy's glass-blowing shop. Elroy was a friend of Saris's mother and does as much as he can to help Saris and Hayden survive without catching the wrath of the Queen's Guard. She shows him the gauntlet, he freaks out and tells her, "You cannot have that anywhere near my shop. I don't want any trouble from the Queen's Guard. You need to get that out of here, and what in the world did you just do? You doomed everyone in the 3rd Ward." Of course she's upset, so she heads off to find her brother Hayden. She meets him at the local pub called the House of Kala, and she finds him on the doorstep of the pub. He's lost all of his money to Carrion Swift by gambling, and when he started fighting back, he got kicked out by the owner. Saris leaves her bag with the gauntlet with Hayden outside and heads into the House of Kala to talk to Carrion and hopefully get Hayden's money back. While she's in there, she's reminded of her time with Carrion romantically, and Carrion ends up asking for a drink. He ends up lecturing her about how silly it was to bring the gauntlet into the 3rd Ward. Essentially, he warns her to get it out of here. He doesn't want any trouble for the residents of the 3rd Ward, considering he's one of them. When Saris leaves, she finds that Hayden is missing. Of course, she panics and she runs through the streets and ends up hearing screaming. Knowing it's Hayden, she runs to the town square and finds Hayden surrounded by Madra's men. The Queen's name is Madra. They're accusing him of stealing the gauntlet and dragging him to prison. When Hayden and Saris lock eyes, Saris tries to tell him not to take the fall for her, and he tries to anyway. Saris ends up attacking the guards, killing 2 of them, maiming another, and she ends up getting dragged away for the crimes of hurting the guards and stealing the gauntlet. Sadly, her last words to her brother weren't very kind. Saris is imprisoned in the dungeons below the palace, and eventually one of the guards, Irrin, brings Saris upstairs to be questioned by Madra. He walks her into this big room that seems relatively unused. It's very dark, full of shadows, and there's this dais in the background with something that looks like a lever. Saris feels called to it, but doesn't understand why, but then Madra appears and starts to question her. Madra asks if she's sent by the Fae, who are supposedly completely made up. And when she no longer sees Saris as a threat, she orders her guard Irrin to kill her. Saris and Irrin struggle, and when it seems like Saris is about to die, she somehow uses her mind to turn Irrin's sword into liquid. The liquid seems to have a mind of its own and ends up attacking Irrin. And when she scrambles away, she scrambles to the dais and sees that that lever was actually a sword. She pulls it out, does her best to hurt Irrin, but she's already pretty much dead. Pulling the sword out of the dais, though, opened up a giant pool of Quicksilver. While she's laying on the ground pretty much bleeding out, a mysterious figure that looks like death rises from the Quicksilver, grabs her, and takes her back through the portal. On the brink of death, of course, Saris passes out. When she wakes up, she's in this beautiful room with a plush bed, and she wakes up to the voice who's been tending to her while she's been unconscious. She meets Everlane. Everlane tells her that she's in the Winter Palace in Evelia, the land of the Fae. Everlane tells Saris that she needs to meet with the king, who happens to be Everlane's father, so that they can figure out what to do with her. They bathe, they get dressed, and they head down to meet the king. When they walk into the room that the king is in, there are hundreds of Fae, and Everlane and Saris are ushered to the front. The king contemplates what to do with Saris, and Saris, being who she is, just continues to mouth off to him. All she wants to do is go back home and protect her brother. The king decides that he'll let her go once she awakens the Quicksilver pools all throughout Evelia. Once the king is finished with Saris, Kingfisher busts in. Kingfisher happens to be the mysterious figure who rose out of the pool of Quicksilver and rescued her. Unfortunately, he looks like a complete madman. He's snarling, he's incoherent, and he just looks insane. Kingfisher acts like a madman because he has Quicksilver inside of him. He passed through a Quicksilver pool without wearing a relic, and some of it absorbed into him, starting to turn him mad. There's some disagreement on the dais. The king wants to just get rid of Kingfisher, but another woman, a seer, happens to step in and says that the king needs to return the relic to Kingfisher or else his entire house will fall. Renthis, the man who dragged Fisher into the room, who also happens to be the general of the army, says that Fisher's punishment should be returning to the battlefield. They end up reaching a compromise, and the king orders Fisher to help Saris reawaken the Quicksilver, and then once he is done with that, he'll return to the battlefield. They all exit the room, they decide to regroup, and Everlane takes Saris to the library. Saris is the first alchemist in a very, very long time, and no one knows how to make the relics. Not only that, but Saris also needs some education on Fae etiquette and Fae history so that she can adapt to this new world. When they get to the library, eventually Kingfisher joins them, and he gives Saris a little bit of hope. They decide to retire for the night, and the next day comes. Everlane, Fisher, Saris, and Renthis all meet up, and Kingfisher is on his antics. He upsets Everlane, and Renthis goes to follow, and Saris has to decide who she's going with. Is she going to stick with Everlane and comfort her? Or is she going to go with Fisher and hopefully learn more about the world that she's in and uncover a little bit more of the truth? She ends up deciding to go with Fisher, and they spend the day cleaning the forge. This ends up being a pain because if you remember, Fisher could have used his magic the whole time, but he tested her and wanted to see if she was used to a hard day's work. The next day, Everlane and Saris end up in the library. They're trying to study alchemy, and of course, Saris apologizes to her for not coming to her yesterday. Kingfisher ends up interrupting them and taking Saris back to the forge so that he can test her with the Quicksilver. He places a small amount of Quicksilver in her palm, and it ends up really hurting her. She's in immense pain, there's screaming in her ears, and she's just very uncomfortable. He urges her to try and control it, and she tries to talk to it. She ends up succeeding, and after she does, she punches Fisher square in the face for putting her through all of that. The next day, Everlane and Saris are getting ready together, and Everlane decides that she's going to go and get them breakfast. There's a knock at the door, and Saris opens it, only to find Kingfisher standing there with breakfast for the two of them. He comes in offering the breakfast as an apology of sorts. They end up chatting just a little bit, and at the end of the meal, he shows his canines. This ends up catching Saris off guard, and she starts feeling a little bit lustful towards him. And when Everlane returns to the room, she accuses Fisher of basically going to a brothel because it smells so lustful in there. Fisher saves Saris the embarrassment and takes the fall for it. That day, Saris continues with her Quicksilver lessons, and then she starts to formulate her escape plan. She has got to get back to her brother. Saris ends up trying to make a relic with absolutely no luck, and frustrated, she asks Kingfisher if she can feel the relic that's around his neck so that hopefully she can learn a little bit more. He tells her that he can't take it off, so she needs to come and touch it while it's still on his body. They end up kissing, and Cerys is mortified, and she tells him that he needs to leave. He says that he'll send Renfis down to escort her to her room, but that he'll respect her wishes and leave. Of course that was a trap for Kingfisher, because as soon as he leaves, Cerys grabs all of her stuff and bolts to try and find the Quicksilver pool that's inside the palace. Cerys makes it all the way to the Quicksilver pool, but Kingfisher stops her just before she steps through it and screams at her for potentially making a huge mistake. She screams and says that she can't go on without knowing that her brother is safe. Fisher decides to offer her a blood oath. He is offering to go back through the Quicksilver portal to Zilvaren in the hopes of finding her brother, and in exchange, Cerys will do whatever he requests that he deems necessary. Cerys accepts, they seal the oath, and Fisher goes through the portal. When he returns, he comes back not bearing Hayden, but Carrie and Swift. Fisher decides that their time at the palace is over. They absolutely have to get out of there. He runs to take care of a few things, grabs Cerys, 2 horses, Carrion, and they decide to set off through the Wicker Wood. They end up stopping at a pub and share some food and drinks, but Fisher surprisingly tries to hide his identity. Renfis eventually catches up with the group, and while they're chatting, Fisher divulges a little bit more about his past and the king, King Bellicon. Bellicon murdered not only the king, but the entirety of the king's family. If that wasn't enough, he stole the crown and he stole Fisher's father's sword. When Fisher's temper rises because of this, he draws everyone's attention to them and everyone recognizes him. To Cerys' surprise, they aren't upset by his return, but almost in awe of him. They all look at him, they thank him for his service on the battlefield, and he acts like he doesn't deserve any of it. So he leaves. Fisher conjures a shadow gate, which is this gaping hole that is a portal to somewhere else within the realm. He orders Cerys through the gate, much to her dismay, and when she walks through the portal, she's violently ill. Renfis ends up picking her up, carrying her off to bed, and apologizing for Fisher's behavior. When she wakes up, Carrion is also awake, and they decide to exchange stories. Carrion tells her that her brother is okay and that the Third Ward is safe, and Cerys decides to share with him all that she learned about the Fae, the king, and the history that she's come to understand. She also shares the task that she's been given to make relics. Fisher ends up interrupting them and pulls Cerys away to the forge to start making relics. When at the forge in Cahlish, Fisher shows Cerys the relics that she'll be working with. He opens up a trunk and inside are about 1,800 rings. Cerys looks at them completely overwhelmed, and Fisher essentially laughs at her because he's got 8 more trunks hidden away in the corner. Seeing all of that, Cerys realizes what this means. She can't go home until she's created a relic for every single one of these rings. Cerys spends the rest of the day trying to make a relic with no luck, and whenever she's on her way back to her rooms, she runs into Renfis. He asks her to have dinner with Fisher and try and repair this bond that just seems really strained. Cerys agrees, thinking that all of them will have dinner together, and it turns out that it's just her and Fisher. They dine together, they start talking, and then in the middle of dinner, feeders attack. Feeders are essentially zombies. They're mindless and they try and kill anything that moves. Fisher and Cerys fight them off together, but Cerys ends up getting scratched and Fisher rushes her off to the healer because their scratches are poisonous. Fisher uses the oath to order Cerys to rest and says that he'll be gone for a few days. Cerys ends up spending 5 days in bed and another 8 days unsuccessfully trying to make relics. When Fisher returns, he asks her to dinner again, and she is not having it this time. She invites Carrion and Renfis to dinner as well. Fisher does not seem to like this, so he decides to demonstrate the power that he has over her. The power to make her feel things that maybe she didn't want the other people at the table knowing. Fisher decides that it's time to go to the war camp, and Cerys is coming along. They get to the war camp and Fisher stalks off. They don't know where he's going. Renfis and Carrion start sparring, and when Carrion is finally tired, Cerys takes over. She loses herself in the movements, she really gets in the groove, and then Fisher appears. She gets completely distracted and ends up losing her groove. He asks Cerys to eat lunch with him and takes her back to his tent. They're eating a meal together, things are going well, and all of a sudden, Fisher kisses Cerys. Whenever she says that she wants him, he ends up taking a step back and questioning his own reality. He leaves the tent in a hurry and Cerys is left stunned. All of them end up meeting up a short while later in the war tent. There we're introduced to Danya, who seems to have a major bone to pick with Kingfisher. She moves to attack him, and Sarah screams no and somehow shatters her sword into a million little pieces. That stops everybody in their tracks because now they know that an alchemist is in their midst. While they're chatting, they're interrupted by scouts who are screaming that the dead are trying to cross the Darn, the river close by. They need everyone out there to try and break the ice so that the dead can't make it all the way across. Renfist tells Carrion and Saris to stay right where they are, but the two of them, of course, don't stay put, and they head out to try and help break the ice as well. Once they head outside, they witness the horde and all of the feeders trying to cross the frozen river. They end up breaking up the frozen river, and once that's done, Fisher's able to use his magic and drown the rest of the feeders. After the feeders are underwater, Fisher scoops up Saris and takes her to his room back at Cahlish. They finally get fully intimate together, and he asks her to stay there overnight so that he knows that she's safe. The next morning she wakes up, looks in the mirror, and finds a bird tattoo on her chest. Remember that tattoo because it'll be important later. After she's done bathing and she's fully dressed, she sees a shadow gate open. When Fisher doesn't come through, eventually she walks through it and sees him standing not too far from the gate. Once Fisher and Saris join up, he starts guiding her across the war camp. When she asks where they're going, he says that he is going to take her to the healer so that she can take a contraceptive. It's at that point that she has to tell him that she was cleansed. A majority of the women in the 3rd ward are cleansed so that they can no longer have children because the queen deemed it unwise for the 3rd ward residents to procreate. Fisher seems angry and heads off again, and Saris heads back to the forge. While working at the forge, Saris is summoned back to the war tent. A few people tell her that the sword that she shattered was incredibly important. It was both a relic and an heirloom, and they beg her to try and reforge it. Saris decides that she's had enough stress for one day and she needs to go grab a drink. So she grabs a drink with one of Fisher's wolves, aka the Lupo Prolis. The one that she meets with is Lorith. Lorith shares some pretty intimate details about his and Fisher's relationship. Fisher found Lorith dying on the side of the road, and being the good male that Fisher is, he decided to offer a piece of his soul to Lorith in order for him to live. We also find out that because Fisher gave a part of his soul to Lorith, if Lorith dies first, the piece of Fisher's soul returns to Fisher. But if Fisher dies first, then his soul is kept in limbo until Lorith passes. Because they're fae, they can live for thousands of years, so Fisher could potentially be stuck for millennia. Lorith says that of course he's been living on borrowed time, so he would himself if Fisher was to go first. Saris ends up coming home drunk after that, and Fisher lets her sleep the day off. The next day, though, he takes her somewhere special, Ballard. The day that he takes her there happens to be the feast for the longest night of the year. They encounter Wendy, who seems to know Fisher very well, and they eat and drink and dance and laugh together. While they're seated at their table, though, Saris ends up essentially blacking out and hearing Anarath Moore repeated inside her head. It turns out she also said that out loud. Fisher gets triggered by that and decides that the night's over. He starts walking them back across the town, and they pass by a fountain that looks suspiciously like Fisher, but feminine. We have a visitor. Fisher decides not to mention anything about it and ends up unlocking one of the townhomes in the square with a key. Fisher seems immensely sad when he walks inside, and everything is draped in sheets. He tells Saris where the bathroom and her bedroom are, and he heads off to his own room. Saris heads off to sleep, but she's awoken in the middle of the night by screams. Saris stumbles around until she finds Fisher's room. She finds him writhing on the bed. He's screaming and he seems to be in immense pain. She stays with him over 4 hours and tries to comfort him, and eventually once the episode subsides, Fisher asks Saris to cuddle. They end up falling asleep like that. When Saris wakes up, she notices something. Fisher is already awake and he seems to be asking her a question. She answers yes, if you know what I mean, and afterwards she falls back asleep. She awakens to the smell of buttery bread and coffee and walks into the living room to find Fisher reading by the window. While they're making conversation, Fisher keeps looking down at her hands, and when she takes a look herself, she sees that she has more tattoos on her hands. She asks Fisher about them and why she received them. He tells her not to worry about it, and he temporarily removes them. Of course, Saris still has no idea what they mean because Fisher didn't explain it to her. They head back to the war camp together, and Saris continues to try and form a relic. Eventually, Carrion joins her and sees how frustrated she is and ends up asking her if she's questioned the Quicksilver about reforging into a relic. Because she's run out of materials for the day, the only test subject that she has is the sword, the broken sword. She talks to the Quicksilver, asks it to be reforged, and they strike a bargain. The Quicksilver gets to keep a song, and in exchange, it will be reforged and it will test the blood of its new wielder. Saris heads back to the forge, forms it into a beautiful blade, and Lorith ends up carving a beautiful wolf pommel. Lorith takes a look at the blade and ends up cutting himself very lightly on it. Lorith sings a song, a ballad about how Fisher and his wolves saved the Asian Gate. Asian? Someone correct me on that one. After the song is over, the Quicksilver agrees to accept Lorith as its new wielder. Lorith, completely stunned, wants to decline because this is Danya's family sword. This is her heirloom, her birthright. The Quicksilver says that it doesn't belong to anyone, and so Lorith is its new wielder. When Lorith grabs it and names it, he realizes that it's a god sword. It's magic. Lorith raises it into the air, and Fisher exclaims that it's angel's breath. It's a true gift. Saris is exhausted, so Fisher carries her back to the tent. He bathes her, he lays her in bed, and they fall asleep together. Saris wakes up while Fisher is sleeping and tries to coax the Quicksilver out of his eye. Fisher ends up waking up and realizes what Saris was trying to do and tells her not to be too hard on herself. He's already tried a bunch of different things. Renfis ends up bursting into the room and sharing that a horde is across the Darn. Fisher, his wolves, and Saris all battle the small horde. At the end of the battle, though, they see someone across the river that shouldn't be there, Everlane. She's trapped, and she's been bitten by Malcolm. In exchange for Everlane, Malcolm wants Fisher back. The group returns to the war tent to try and figure out what they can possibly do to save Everlane. Fisher essentially goes comatose, and Renfis explains to Saris what it means for Everlane to have been bitten. From here, there's only two options. She either dies and becomes a feeder, or she dies and comes back as some sort of sentient vampire. With either option, though, she'll be bound to Malcolm. She'll forever be in his servitude and never be free. While everyone's still sorting through their thoughts, Danya breaks in, and she's furious that Lorith has her sword. She goes to reach for it, and her entire hand disintegrates. Fisher finally snaps out of it and says that he'll take her back to Cahlish and help her heal if she finally drops all of this business with the sword. She agrees, and the group of them head back to Cahlish. Fisher, Lorith, Renfis, and Danya all head off to do their own thing, and Carrion and Saris head to the forge to try to make another relic. This time, the Quicksilver will only be reforged if Saris shares a secret. Saris makes that deal with the Quicksilver, she forges the relic, and after it's forged, she decides to try the ring on. Immediately, she blacks out and hears that voice again, screaming Anorath more. Helena comes in and breaks that vision. This time though, Saris sees something a little bit different about Helena. She sees all of the tattoos on her hands. When she starts asking Helena about what they mean, she shares with Saris that they're used to mark a mating bond. True mates don't exist anymore, so married fae get tattoos to show their love and commitment for one another. When Saris presses Helena for more information, she shares that in the stories about mates, the tattoos would simply appear on the skin. Even more, if there were script around your wrists, like Saris had, that would mean that you and your mate are God-bound. While this was beautiful and meant that you were chosen by the gods to be together, it always ended in tragedy. One of the pair always died tragically. Saris is too stunned for words and tries to find Fisher. When she finds him reading, she confronts him about what the tattoos mean, and he finally comes clean with her. He shares more about his mother, who is a talented seer. She created this beautiful book for him, detailing Fisher's life, and even drew a picture of a female that looked like Saris, but simply had fae ears. When the Quicksilver pool opened and Fisher went through it, the mating bond snapped the moment that he saw Saris. He realized that he was in no condition to find his mate. He was getting sicker by the day from the Quicksilver, and so he did what he thought was right. He tried to push Saris away. Even more, he promises that he would die before hurting anyone. Saris, of course, is angry and wants to find an answer. There has to be a way to save him. Saris decides to sleep in a separate room for that night, and the next day, Fisher and a few of his wolves head off in search of a witch. A witch might be the only person who can help Fisher. He ends up returning later that day with Isabel. She agrees to help, but warns that it may cost people their lives. Again that night, Saris tries to sleep away from Fisher, but he comes and retrieves her. He takes her away to Ballard, back to the townhome, and they share a romantic and intimate night together. He accepts the mating bond and tells her to take the night to think it over. They fall asleep, and when she awakens, Fisher's nowhere to be found. A shadow gate is open in the living room, and beneath the pile of clothes that Fisher laid out for her is a note from him. He writes that he went to face Malcolm alone and that he'll wait for her in the afterlife. Refusing to accept what Fisher has done, Cerys travels through the Shadow Gate back to Cahlish and tells the group there what Fisher has done, and together they devise a plan. Fisher plans to send Everlane back to Cahlish through a Shadow Gate. Because the Shadow Gates stay open for just a little while after the person has passed through, they have a small window of opportunity to head through it the other way. They solidify their plan and they wait until the Shadow Gate appears. Everlane crashes through, and Cerys, Carrion, and Lorith make their way through into the other side. They all end up falling into a lake, and Lorith pulls Cerys and Carrion out, and they start climbing this giant rock in an attempt to get to Fisher. Perrin, Madra's guard from the beginning, drags the three of them to the dais where Fisher is on his knees. Not only is Fisher on his knees in front of Malcolm, but Belicon and Madra are also there. It turns out that the three of them were working together this whole time. In order to torture Fisher even more, Belicon releases Fisher from his oath of silence. Then, Fisher's forced to tell the tale of Gillethrye. Malcolm was attacking and used a small portion of his army to draw the Fae army out of Gillethrye, while the rest of the vampire army marched in. Realizing that this was a distraction, Fisher grabs a few of his wolves and heads back to Gillethrye, and while they're fighting, Fisher heads off to find Malcolm alone. He wants to try and make a deal to spare his people. Malcolm proposes a coin flip. If it lands on one side, Malcolm leaves the city now. If it lands on the other, Malcolm takes the city, and Fisher and Malcolm fight at a later date. While the toss is being decided, there are 3 stipulations. Fisher can't hurt Malcolm, Belicon, or Madra. Neither of them can influence the outcome of the toss, and Fisher can't share any details about their bargain. Once Belicon tossed the coin, Malcolm grabbed it mid-air. The outcome was never decided. Malcolm ended up trapping Fisher in a labyrinth, and he spent 102 years trying to reach the center in the search of the coin. Once he got to the center, he spent another 8 years searching among piles for coins, never to find it. Eventually, the Quicksilver pool opened, and Fisher took a step through it, and the rest is history. Eventually, Fisher gets tired of all of this talking, grabs his father's sword, and runs Belicon through with it. Fisher, Cerys, Carrion, and Lorith all start running through the labyrinth, and Fisher guides them through the first components. They get past this giant spider, moving walls, and make it to the center of the labyrinth. Once they get to the center, they realize that none of the coins are the one that Malcolm has. Because Malcolm's coin has Quicksilver in it, Cerys uses her alchemical powers to call to it. Unfortunately, before they can do much, Malcolm ends up finding them in the center of the labyrinth. Carrion ends up tricking him into drinking his blood, and he reveals that he is the Dianthus heir. Because he's a Dianthus heir, and his family helped develop the cure to Fae vampirism, drinking Carrion's blood hurts Malcolm immensely. This gives Cerys the time to run and find where the Quicksilver coin is. She finds out that it's inside that giant spider creature that they killed, and she yanks into its dead body to try and pull it out. After she pulls it out, Malcolm finds her. She pulls one last trick and pulls the coin out of Malcolm's pouch. With her last moments, she cuts his head off and flips the coin. She lays down to die, and she hears Fisher in her head begging her to hold on, that he's not far away. She goes in and out of consciousness, but before she slips completely away, she hears Fisher and one of Malcolm's lords, Teladius, talking. Teladius says the only way to save her at this point is to turn her. Because Cerys doesn't have enough strength to consent, Fisher does it for her. Fisher picks up Cerys and starts carrying her to a Quicksilver pool. While they're passing through the pool, the Quicksilver asks her one more favor, for an audience. Cerys agrees and is transported to a totally different realm. She awakens on a grassy knoll with a beautiful tree in the distance. The sun is shining, the birds are chirping. It's absolutely beautiful. She hears 2 girls, and eventually they approach her. They're Ball and Mithin, 2 goddesses. They tell Cerys that their father has been waiting for her. They escort her over to Zareth, the god of chaos. After they get introduced to one another, Zareth shares why he bound Cerys and Fisher. The tree in the distance essentially represents the universe. Each of the branches are different realms. All of the gods got together when they saw that Cerys and Fisher would eventually unite and become mates. Unfortunately, Cerys and Fisher becoming mates essentially would kill off multiple different realms in the universe. The majority of the gods decided that it wasn't worth it and that they should just let the tree die and move on and plant a new seed elsewhere. Because Zareth's daughters, Ball and Mithin, love this universe so much, he decided to do whatever he could to keep it safe. He decided to take Fisher and Cerys under his protection. Finally, he offers Cerys his deal. If Cerys wants to save her mate Fisher, she has to agree to have her thread of fate severed. Once her thread of fate is severed, no man, fae, or god will know the outcome of this universe. But this gives them an opportunity where their universe doesn't end. So Cerys gets the choice: return and be resigned to her tragic fate, or sever the thread and not know the outcome. She decides on the latter. Zareth severs her thread of fate and sends her back to Avelia as something new. When Cerys awakens, she feels sick and sensitive to light. Teladius is there and tells her that she's been turned. Fisher enters the room and he and Cerys talk. He asks her if he made the right decision by allowing Teladius to turn her. He tells her that Malcolm is dead and that Belicon and Madra fled. And probably most importantly, because Cerys killed Malcolm, she's the new queen of the Vampire Fae. If you made it this far, thank you for sticking with me. I cannot wait to read Brimstone. Drop your Quicksilver theories and eventually your Brimstone theories in the comments. See you next time.